the first time Olivia Hayes set foot in Willow Creek, Montana. She tripped over her own skirts and landed face first in the muddy Main Street, sending her prized books scattering across the dirt, while the afternoon stage pulled away behind her. It was May of 1878, and the laughter that erupted from the saloon porch made her cheeks burn hotter than the summer sun beating down on her back. "That's enough." The deep voice cut through the jeering like a knife. Olivia looked up, her auburn hair falling loose around her face, to see a tall man standing over her. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but his outstretched hand was steady as a rock. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his boots caked with the dust of the range. "Mason Fletcher," he introduced himself as he helped her to her feet. "Don't mind those jackals. They've got nothing better to do than laugh at their own shadows." Olivia brushed futilely at her mud-stained traveling dress. "Olivia Hayes, I'm the new schoolteacher." Mason's expression softened slightly as he bent to retrieve her scattered books. "Schoolteacher, huh? Town's been waiting on you for months." Olivia accepted the muddy books with a grateful smile. "I was delayed in Chicago. My father." She trailed off, unwilling to share her troubles with this stranger, no matter how kind his intervention had been. "Let me help you to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house," Mason offered, lifting her heavy trunk with ease. "She's expecting you." As they walked down the dusty Main Street, Olivia felt the eyes of the town following them. Mason Fletcher was clearly someone of note in Willow Creek, and the way he'd come to her defense had drawn attention. "You're not from around here," she observed, trying to match his long strides despite her restrictive skirts. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Not originally. Been ranching outside town for 5 years now. The Double F Ranch." "Fletcher Family Ranch," she guessed. "Fletcher Future," he corrected. "Just me and my hopes, madam." Mrs. Holloway's boarding house turned out to be a tidy 2-story structure with white lace curtains and a surprisingly lush garden out front. The landlady herself was a plump, pleasant woman who fussed over Olivia's muddy state and immediately ordered hot water for a bath. "Mr. Fletcher, you're a sight for sore eyes," Mrs. Holloway declared. "Staying for supper." Mason removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "Not today. Mrs. H got to get back to the ranch before dark. Just wanted to make sure Miss Hayes got settled." Before Olivia could thank him properly, he'd placed her trunk in the foyer, nodded politely, and disappeared back into the afternoon glare. "That man, Mrs. Holloway said with a meaningful look as she showed Olivia to her room, "is the finest catch in the territory, and half the girls in town know it." Olivia smiled politely but said nothing. She wasn't in Willow Creek to find a husband. She was here to teach, to start fresh, and to escape the suffocating grief that had followed her father's death 3 months earlier. The schoolhouse was a simple 1-room building at the edge of town. When Olivia arrived the next morning, she found it badly in need of cleaning, with ancient texts piled haphazardly and dust coating every surface. She'd rolled up her sleeves and set to work immediately, determined to have the place ready before students arrived on Monday. She was on her hands and knees scrubbing the floor when a shadow fell across the doorway. "Miss Hayes." Olivia looked up to find Mason Fletcher leaning against the doorframe, a wooden crate in his arms. "Mr. Fletcher," she acknowledged, hastily getting to her feet and brushing down her apron. "Brought some things you might need." He set down the crate, which Olivia discovered contained chalk, slates, pencils, and several nearly new readers. "How did you figure the school supplies might be lacking?" He shrugged. "These were collecting dust at the general store." Olivia's throat tightened. "That's incredibly thoughtful, Mr. Fletcher." "Mason," he corrected gently. "Everyone calls me Mason." "Well then, Mason," she said, testing his name, "I'm very grateful." He lingered, hat in hand, seemingly reluctant to leave. "If you need help getting this place ready, I could spare a few hours." Olivia hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I would welcome the assistance." They worked side by side through the afternoon. Mason repaired broken benches, fixed the stove that had rusted over the winter, and even fashioned some new chalk holders. Olivia learned that he had come west after the war between the states, seeking a fresh start like so many others. He didn't speak much of his past, but there was a shadow in his eyes that suggested deeper wounds than he revealed. "Why did you help me yesterday?" Olivia asked as they took a break, sharing the lunch Mrs. Holloway had packed. Mason considered her question. "My mother taught me that you can tell the measure of a community by how they treat newcomers." He passed her a slice of apple. "And maybe I didn't like seeing someone surrounded and alone." Something in his words resonated with her own experience. "Like you've been," she observed quietly. His eyes, a clear hazel that reminded her of autumn, met hers briefly. "Maybe so." By the time they finished, the schoolhouse was transformed, floors clean, walls dusted, benches arranged in neat rows, and even fresh wildflowers in a jar on her desk. "I can't thank you enough," Olivia said as they stood in the doorway, surveying their work. "Town meetings tonight at the church," Mason said, settling his hat back on his head. "Good chance to meet the parents of your future students." Olivia nodded. "I'll be there." The town meeting was well attended, and Olivia found herself the center of attention as Mayor Brooks introduced her to the community. She spoke briefly about her teaching experience in Chicago and her plans for the school year, acutely aware of Mason standing at the back of the room, arms crossed, but with an encouraging half-smile when her eyes found his. Afterward, as parents approached to introduce themselves and their children, Olivia noticed a group of men surrounding Mason, their conversation appearing heated. One man in particular, tall, expensively dressed, with cold eyes, seemed to be doing most of the talking. Mason's posture remained relaxed, but Olivia could see tension in the set of his jaw. "That's Walter Simmons," Mrs. Holloway whispered, following Olivia's gaze. "Owns the biggest spread in the county. Been trying to buy out Mason's water rights for years." "Why?" Olivia asked, intrigued despite herself. "Mason's land controls access to the best stream in the valley. Without it, Simmons can't expand." Mrs. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "And that man doesn't like being told no." Over the next few weeks, Olivia threw herself into teaching. Her class of 23 students ranged from 6 to 16 years old, with varying levels of education. Some could barely write their names, while others were ready for advanced arithmetic and literature. She found herself challenged and fulfilled by the work, rising early and often staying late to prepare lessons. Mason became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, sometimes bringing books from his personal collection, other times simply stopping by to see if she needed anything. Their conversations grew easier, spanning literature, politics, and the daily dramas of town life. One evening in late June, as Olivia was walking back to the boarding house, she spotted Mason's horse tied outside the telegraph office. On impulse, she waited for him to emerge. "Evening, Miss Hayes," he greeted her, though his expression seemed troubled. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Mason hesitated, then offered his arm. "Would you care for a walk?" They strolled toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie, and the sunset painted the horizon in vivid oranges and purples. "Simmons is blocking my cattle drive," Mason finally said. "He's convinced neighboring ranchers not to let me cross their land to reach the railhead in Billings." "Can he do that?" Olivia asked, indignant on his behalf. "Legally?" "Yes, Those are private properties. Mason's voice was measured, but she could hear the underlying frustration. Without access to the railhead, I can't sell my cattle. Without selling my cattle, I can't pay my hands or my bank notes. Olivia considered this. There must be another way. There's an old trail through Blackfoot Pass, Mason said. Hasn't been used in years, and it would add 3 days to the drive, but it bypasses Simmons' allies. Why hasn't it been used? Mason's mouth tightened. It's dangerous. Narrow passes, steep drops, and this time of year flash floods. They had stopped walking, and in the fading light, Olivia could see the weariness in his face. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his arm. You'll find a way. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and something deeper that made her breath catch. I should get you back, he said softly. It's getting dark. As they turned to walk back toward town, neither mentioned that her hand remained on his arm. The following Saturday, Olivia was startled by a knock at her door in the boarding house. Mrs. Holloway stood there with a young boy Olivia recognized as one of Mason's ranch hands, barely 16 years old. Miss Hayes, the boy said, twisting his hat nervously. Mr. Fletcher sent me to fetch you. Says there's an emergency at the schoolhouse. Concerned, Olivia grabbed her shawl and followed the boy through town. When they reached the schoolhouse, however, she found not an emergency but Mason waiting with a picnic basket and a saddled horse. What's this? She asked, confused but smiling. Mason dismissed the boy with thanks, then turned to Olivia. I'm headed up to scout Blackfoot Pass tomorrow. Thought you might like to see some of the countryside today. He gestured to the horse. Unless you'd rather not. Olivia hesitated only briefly. I'd be delighted. Though I should warn you, I'm not much of a rider. Old Thunder here is gentle as a lamb, Mason assured her, helping her mount and then swinging up behind her. They rode for an hour, the close proximity sending Olivia's pulse racing whenever the horse's movement pressed her back against Mason's chest. Eventually, they reached a clearing beside a creek, shaded by cottonwoods and carpeted with wildflowers. It's beautiful, Olivia breathed as Mason spread a blanket and unpacked bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a bottle of lemonade. Found it my first year here, Mason said. Don't bring many people. The implication that she was special wasn't lost on Olivia. As they ate, he told her more about his plans for the ranch, his hopes of breeding a better strain of cattle that could withstand the harsh Montana winters. You're building something that will last, she observed. Mason nodded. That's the plan, something to leave behind. He studied her face. What about you? Will you stay in Willow Creek? It was a question Olivia had been asking herself. I signed a 1-year contract with the school board after that. She trailed off. Chicago must seem pretty far away now. It does, she agreed. Though sometimes I miss the libraries, the concerts. Culture, Mason said with understanding. It's what these frontier towns lack most. Not entirely, Olivia countered. There's a different kind of culture here, community. People who know each other's stories. Mason's smile reached his eyes. So you're warming to us. To some more than others, she admitted, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Mason cleared his throat and began packing up the remains of their picnic. We should head back. Clouds are moving in. The ride back was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. When they reached the schoolhouse, Mason helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. Be careful tomorrow, Olivia said. At the pass. Mason nodded. I'll be back by Tuesday. He hesitated, then added, maybe I could call on you properly. Sunday next. Olivia's heart leapt. I'd like that. She watched him ride away, aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. 3 days later, when Mason hadn't returned, Olivia began to worry. By Thursday, with still no word, she approached Sheriff Taylor after school. "He's probably just delayed," the sheriff assured her. "Trail can be unpredictable." But Olivia couldn't shake her concern. That evening, the same young ranch hand, Timothy, appeared at the boarding house. "Mr. Fletcher's horse came back without him, Miss Hayes," the boy said, his face pale. "Saddle was empty. Mr. Harris, that's the foreman, he's organizing a search party at first light." Olivia spent a sleepless night, her mind conjuring horrible scenarios. At dawn, she was at the Double F Ranch, dressed in her most practical skirts and boots. "Miss Hayes," the foreman greeted her with surprise. "This ain't no place for a lady." "I'm coming with you," Olivia stated firmly. "I know which route he was planning to take." Mr. Harris, a weathered man in his 50s, studied her face and apparently saw something that convinced him. "You can ride well enough to keep up." The search party consisted of 5 ranch hands, the sheriff, and Olivia. They followed the trail Mason would have taken, heading into increasingly rugged terrain as the day progressed. By mid-afternoon, they reached Blackfoot Pass, a narrow defile between steep rock walls. "Flash flood came through here," Sheriff Taylor observed, pointing to debris caught in bushes well above the current water level. "Hit hard and fast by the looks of it." Olivia's stomach knotted with fear. They pressed on, spreading out to search both sides of the creek that ran through the pass. It was Olivia who spotted it first, Mason's hat, caught in an eddy beside a fallen tree. "Here," she called, dismounting and scrambling down the bank. The others converged quickly, and soon they found more evidence: Mason's saddle bags caught in branches, his rifle half buried in silt. But no sign of the man himself. "We need to keep moving downstream," Olivia insisted when the sheriff suggested turning back as daylight began to fade. "Miss Hayes," Mr. Harris said gently, "if the flood took him this far, chances ain't good." "We don't know that," she argued, fighting tears. "He could have found high ground, could be injured, waiting for help." Reluctantly, they agreed to continue for another hour before making camp. The terrain grew more difficult, the creek widening into a small river with steep banks. Olivia's hope began to falter as the light dimmed. And then she saw its smoke, just a wisp, rising from a stand of pines on the far bank. "Look," she pointed. "Someone's there." They forded the river at a shallow point and followed the smoke to a crude shelter made of pine branches. And there was Mason, pale and clearly injured but alive, tending a small fire. "Took you long enough," he rasped when he saw them, his face breaking into a relieved smile that turned to surprise when Olivia rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. "You idiot," she whispered fiercely, taking in the makeshift splint on his leg and the dried blood on his temple. "We thought you were dead." Mason winced as she touched his face. "Almost was. Horse spooked at her rattlesnake, threw me, broke my leg in the fall, then the flood came." His eyes held hers. "Thought if you kept me moving." The ride back to town was slow and painful for Mason, who was strapped to a travois behind Mr. Harris's horse. Olivia rode beside him, refusing to leave his side even when they made camp for the night. "You shouldn't have come looking for me," Mason told her as they sat by the fire, the others giving them space. "Of course I should have," Olivia replied. "You would have done the same for me." He couldn't argue with that. Instead, he reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. "When I was out there, thinking I might not make it back, I realized I hadn't told you something important." Olivia's heart hammered in her chest. "What's that?" "I'm falling in love with you, Olivia Hayes." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes. "Well," she said, her voice wavering slightly, "I suppose that's convenient because I appear to be falling in love with you too, Mason Fletcher." His smile was worth every mile of the difficult journey. Back in Willow Creek, Mason's recovery took weeks. Olivia visited daily after school, reading to him, playing chess, and helping with ranch correspondence. Their courtship was conducted largely from his sick room, but neither seemed to mind. The town buzzed with gossip, but Olivia found she didn't care. By August, Mason was mobile again, though still relying on crutches. His cattle drive had been postponed, but he'd managed to negotiate a later delivery date with the buyer. "Simmons came by yesterday," Mason told Olivia one evening as they sat on the porch of his ranch house. "Offered to buy me out again." Olivia stiffened. "What did you tell him?" "That the double F isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Mason reached for her hand. "Especially now that I have more reason than ever to stay." As summer turned to fall, Olivia settled fully into her role as teacher, winning over even the most reluctant students. Mason became a regular presence at school events, often arriving with books for the small library they were building together or staying to help older students with practical mathematics. In October, Walter Simmons made one final play for Mason's land. At a town meeting called to discuss funding for a new church, Simmons stood and publicly questioned whether a failed cattle rancher should be influencing town decisions. "Failed," Mason responded calmly from his seat. "My cattle will be at market next week, Mr. Simmons, and my ranch is thriving." "Only because you had help," Simmons sneered, his gaze flicking to Olivia. "A schoolmarm playing rancher's wife." The room went silent. Olivia felt every eye turn to her, including Mason's. But before either of them could respond, Timothy, the young ranch hand, stood up. "Mr. Fletcher didn't fail because he wasn't alone," the boy said, his voice cracking slightly. "He succeeded because he built something people want to be part of. Not like your spread, Mr. Simmons, where hands quit every month because you treat 'em like dirt." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Simmons's face darkened, but Mayor Brooks quickly steered the meeting back to church matters. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Mason took Olivia's arm. "Walk with me," he asked. They strolled to the schoolhouse, which stood dark and quiet in the autumn evening. "Simmons wasn't entirely wrong," Mason said as they reached the steps. "I couldn't have done it without you." Olivia smiled. "I didn't do much. You believed I would come back." Mason turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "That's everything." In the silver moonlight he looked younger, the lines of worry erased from his face. "Olivia Hayes, I love you more than I thought possible." "Would you consider becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up inside her. "I would consider it very favorably, Mason Fletcher." He laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Is that a yes, schoolmarm?" "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "That's a yes." They were married on Christmas Eve in the newly completed church, with the entire town in attendance, even Walter Simmons, who had finally accepted defeat and moved his operations further north. Mrs. Holloway wept openly, declaring it the finest match Willow Creek had ever seen. As Mason and Olivia exchanged vows, snow began to fall outside, dusting the town in pristine white. When they emerged from the church, the townspeople lined the street, cheering as Mason swept Olivia into his arms for a kiss. "Remember when they all laughed at you?" he murmured against her ear. Olivia smiled up at her husband. "Best stumble I ever took." Spring found them settled into life together at the Double F, with Olivia continuing to teach while helping Mason implement his breeding program. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts, and by the following year, they had not only expanded the herd but added a small orchard and vegetable gardens that supplied both the ranch and the town. In the summer of 1880, as they celebrated their first wedding anniversary, Olivia shared news that brought Mason to his knees beside her rocking chair on the porch. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach. "Are you certain, doctor?" "Wilson confirmed it yesterday," Olivia said, her eyes shining. "Due in January." Mason kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "The day you stumbled into my town," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was the luckiest day of my life." Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born on a cold January night, with Mrs. Holloway serving as midwife and Mason pacing the floor below until the infant's first cry pierced the night. When he held his daughter for the first time, the hardened rancher wept unashamedly. Over the years that followed, the Fletcher family grew to include two more children, Michael and Catherine, and the Double F Ranch became known throughout the territory for its quality stock and warm hospitality. Olivia eventually left teaching to focus on the ranch and her family, but not before establishing a proper school building with 2 classrooms and a small library named in honor of her father. By 1885, Willow Creek had transformed from a dusty frontier settlement to a thriving small town, complete with a railway spur that Mason had helped finance. The Fletcher children grew up strong and educated, with their mother's love of books and their father's connection to the land. On warm summer evenings, the family often gathered on the porch of the ranch house, which had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. Olivia would read aloud while Mason played his harmonica, the children listening with rapt attention until the stars emerged in the vast Montana sky. "You ever miss Chicago?" Mason asked his wife one night after the children had gone to bed, the question an echo of one asked years earlier by a creek side. Olivia considered, her head resting against his shoulder. "Not for a moment," she answered truthfully. "Everything I love is here." And as they sat together, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, both reflected on how a simple stumble in the mud had led to a lifetime of happiness. Neither could have imagined that day in Willow Creek's dusty Main Street.